of inspiration. I'm not sure how many of you watched the finals of Australia Ninja. Did anybody watch that? Yes, no? Oh, it was actually amazing. And I achieved my personal best this week. I managed to get from my desk to my fridge in 2 large strides. So that was an achievement for me. You know, you have to reach for the sky. Always an honor to have our amazing National President, Ronette Freyd, in the house. And of course, our Special Executive Director, Ilana Maisels, who is our pillar of strength. She's led by example throughout this whole ordeal, made us all feel absolutely connected and supported, which is really incredible. And just welcome to all of you, everybody that's here. I'm just changing mine, Ariella, so I can see people here. So the normal in-house rules, we just have everybody on mute, and whilst the rabbi is speaking to us, and then we will unmute people at the end to ask questions. I'm sure there will be many. So as you all know, I'm Jackie Chait. I'm the Legacy Manager for JNF Victoria, and leaving a bequest or a gift in one's will is always a wonderful, benevolent, and inspirational thing to do for generations to come. I'm always here for a chat, a coffee, a virtual drink, whatever it is that you'd like to do. And now, of course, for our incredible guest speaker today, we have Rabbi Dr. Laibl Wolf. Rabbi Wolf is an unusual exponent of ancient wisdoms and cutting-edge psychology. He's internationally renowned as a highly entertaining lecturer and is the celebrated author of the best-selling Practical Kabbalah, published by Random House. A graduate of law and psychology, he's also a Lubavitcher Chassid, with a published repertoire of training materials on mindfulness, meditation, and relaxation response techniques. His works have been highly acclaimed by diverse world leaders, such as Rabbi Lord Sir Jonathan Sacks, the Dalai Lama, and the late Chief Rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu of blessed memory, from whom he also received his rabbinical ordination. He has been described as a Jewish synthesis of Tony Robbins, Wayne Dyer, and Deepak Chopra. He and his son, Rabbi Menachem Wolf, have created a highly innovative and trailblazing personal growth center, Spirit Grow, that is leading the Jewish world in fusing Jewish spiritual teachings with wellness training, management theory, relationship enrichment, and spirituality. He resides here in our shtetl of Melbourne with his wife Leah, with whom he has 7 children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a number of whom are reserve officers in the Israeli army. Rabbi, thank you for giving up your invaluable time to be with us this morning. Over to you.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be with you and to be with all of you, especially under the adverse circumstances. And I can see we all make a very special effort in order to connect with each other and communicate with each other, because the central feature of humanity is connectedness and joining and having a sense of camaraderie. And fulfillment in life derives from relationships. There was a very interesting study that came out from Harvard University last year, which was a long-standing study of the nature of happiness. And the singular factor that they brought out as being the contributor to fulfillment and happiness in a very significant way was relationships. And therefore our capacity to be able to connect with each other. And now with the development of technology and Zoom, and how many of us would have thought that a year ago that we would be adept at Zoom technology, especially some of us perhaps who are a little more than 25 years of age. I'm sure we never imagined that we would be. Nevertheless, here we are together. We have quite an agenda this morning. Courage, strength under these adverse circumstances and all adversity throughout history. We Jewish people have been the most buoyant and the most successful in longevity of our history. When I met with the Dalai Lama, he asked me to speak with him about 2 specific subjects. And we spent 2.5 hours discussing this one-on-one. And the first subject was, what is the secret of our survival? Because he said his people were now moving into an exile, and he understood that we Jewish people are the experts at survival in exile. His exile was at that point 70 years or so. Ours is some thousands of years, and we discussed that at some length. And unrelated to that and to our subject today was a second subject, and that was Jewish family life. He had heard about the wonderful aspects of how enriched Jewish family life was. And we discussed that also. What are the pertinent elements that distinguish Jewish family life from family life generally? Coming back to our subject, strength, courage. These are big words, and we use them quite easily and they roll off our lips. But what do they mean? What are the elements of courage? What are the elements of strength? I want to be able to reduce these to basics. I'm going to use some constructs within psychology, and I'm going to draw on Jewish spiritual teachings to explain what is the nature of inner strength and how we can actually systematically train to elicit it under the circumstances when we need to. Going back to basics, who are we? I'm going to give you a very strange analogy. A human being, 5 seconds before he or she dies, is 120, we should all live to 120, hears and sees clearly. 5 seconds after the person dies, they can no longer hear and they can no longer see. And you would ask, well, of course, they're dead. Is that not the answer? But then what is death? It's just the word. 5 seconds before the person died, they could hear and see. 5 seconds later, there's been no decomposition in the biology or the physiology of the ear, of the eye, and yet it stopped functioning. And the answer is, it hasn't stopped functioning as such. It, as a piece of machinery, is still there. Something else is missing. Whether we call that missing aspect an energy flow, excuse me, that flows through the body, whether we want to call it neshama, soul, whatever word we attribute to it, it's very clear that there's been a remarkable change 5 seconds before death and 5 seconds after death. In other words, you and I are composites of biological machinery called body and a spiritual or energetic force that courses through and flows through that body to animate it. When that energy force flows through the biology of the ear, the human experience is called hearing, the consciousness of hearing. When that same spiritual energy force flows through the machinery of the eye, it becomes an experience called seeing, but it requires both elements. And when it flows through the extremely complex machinery of the brain, and brain is nothing more than physiological machinery, complex as it might be. There's nothing essentially spiritual, mystical about brain. But when the energy of the neshama flows through the brain, the result is the human experience of mind, seichel. Mind, which there are many words, intellect, cogitation, thinking in the English language, because the English language is itself a composite language. It's not a pure language like Hebrew, like Lashon HaKodesh. English is made up of Anglo-Saxon, Celtic, Romance languages of Europe and onwards. But Hebrew is very pristine. We'll come to that a little bit later on. So my discussion here leads to the following question. What is the nature of consciousness? Answer, big definition. Consciousness is the human experience of the neshama flowing through the physiology of the body, through the machinery of the body. That's very important because when we speak about big words like strength and courage, it's very hard to pinpoint it. But now when we reduce it to elemental aspects of consciousness, we can have both a language as well as a picture of what we're talking about. Now I'm going to bring you a second model, and this will be the only other complication that I'm going to raise in our discussion. Stay with me. This neshama, this spiritual force, or if you don't want to speak about it theologically or religiously, just call it simply some animating energy flow. When it flows into us, it flows as a spiritual umbilical cord from somewhere way out. In our tradition, from God. God flows itself into the universe and through the human being. That's the animating force. But when it flows into us, it's as if it splits into two components, two strands of energy. One we call the nefesh behamit, which means our ego self, to use a more psychological term, the sense of self. The part that perhaps Maslow's hierarchical model would describe the quest for food, clothing, shelter, resulting in a quest for self-actualization. But it's self-centered. That's not selfish. It seeks personal security. Why do I want to eat? Why do I want to have a clothing or a shelter? Because I need to secure myself. I need to secure myself because I am afraid of the world and I need to hold the world at bay. That's how the nefesh bahamis, how our lower order self operates. But it's neutral in that sense. Of course we have to eat. Of course we need clothing and shelter. The problem is the lower order self, the nefesh bahamis, the ego self, has no boundaries. It doesn't have limits. How much food, how much clothing, how much shelter? Well, I'm not going to eat anything unless it is master shelf designed. Master shelf designed. I'm not going to have clothing unless it is designer label. And I'm going to have 100 outfits in the wardrobe because one day I might need that particular one. Shelter. I need to have a home as beautiful as the mansion in Gone with the Wind, and I have to have chandeliers in every room, including the toilet. In other words, the lower order self, the quest for security, has no limits, no boundaries. And we see that in everyday life, even within ourselves. That quest to secure ourselves has no limits. We make our first $1 million. I've got to have 5. 5 is not enough, 10. I was counseling, I do a lot of counseling work internationally, and I was counseling a billionaire. A billionaire. This was going back some years in the previous financial crisis. And he had lost $600 million. He was worth 1.2 beforehand. He only had half left, $600 million left. He cried like a baby, worried that he doesn't have a roof over his head. You and I would laugh at that. And yet, for him, it was real. He really experienced that loss as total loss of security. In other words, the lower order self, the nefesh bahamis, doesn't have parameters. Now, let me go back to what I said earlier. There are 2 strands of consciousness that flows through us. I've just described the lower self. Now let me describe what we call the higher order self, the nefesh elokis. Don't worry about the terminology. The higher order self is our quest for altruism, other-centeredness, the otherness of life, compassion, empathy, caring for the other. This part of me is not centered on self, but other. And we have these 2 flows within us, resulting in inner conflict. Psychologists have spent eons trying to define the nature of the human being, and in the more contemporary psychologies of the 20th century onwards, they have defined it in context of competing and conflicting forces within. Freud quickly comes to mind, does he not, in terms of the id and the ego. Jung follows the pattern and speaks about an underlying totality from which we draw from two elemental aspects. Doesn't matter what the models are. In our Jewish spiritual teachings, we also have clarity that there are at least two competing forces. And every moment, you and I need to resolve these. Is it flight or fight? Am I going to cave in, or will I be courageous? Will I be weak, or will I draw from my inner strength, which is specifically our topic? So now I've got some model to be able to speak in terms of courage and in terms of strength. It is the way that I am able to guide this inner conflict of self-centeredness and other-centeredness in a way that my higher self chooses to express. But there's another problem, and that is our life has picked up habits. We are creatures of habit, as the phrase goes. Now, with more recent times, especially in the last couple of decades, with the wonderful evolution of technology, we've been able to study and understand much better what goes on in the brain. In fact, we can see it often on screen by wiring people up and observing what's happening inside. We now have a much clearer understanding of what is the nature of habit. It's only a word, and yet it's an amazing process. When you think a thought, and let's not worry right now where that thought comes from, how you go fishing in the pond of your subconsciousness, and how you have your own characteristic fishing style and are able to pick up that fish, that thought, which is idiosyncratic to you, that you only alone would have thought that thought at that moment. Put that aside. But once the thought pops into the head and then is given full-blown analysis and development, and I have a thought and an idea at this moment, so I have to then act on it. But going back to the stage of thinking, you know what a thought is? In our scientific analysis, observation of thought, a thought is a flow of neurotransmitters from one nerve end fiber in the brain to another nerve end fiber in the brain. And that flow between those two nerve end fibers, of which there are billions, constitutes the way that I can consciously become aware of a thought. That thought is that pathway. If I think it again, and think it again, and think it again, I cut a groove in the mind, making it much more easy for that thought to flow. And the more that I practice it, not realizing it, the more it becomes there and becomes habitual. And therefore, when under threat, if I've always experienced fear, which is my reading of reality, and that thought flows, then if I've done it for 1,000,000 times before in my life, the result is that's the first port of call. That's what I do. I become afraid. Question. That was one example of a habit. Can we change such habits? And the answer is absolutely. And this is where most of us tend not to succeed, because we are a slave to our habits without training to undo the habit. So if I'm lacking the courage to confront the world, my life, in a COVID environment, this is a good moment to start practicing to change the habit of pessimism, fear, resultant depression, God forbid, moving into clinical depression. So let's see, how can you undo that? Hashem created us with a wonderful non-capacity. What's that non-capacity? You can't think of two thoughts at the same time. Did you notice? You can't think of two thoughts at exactly the same instant. You can oscillate very quickly between thoughts, but in the one moment, you cannot think of two thoughts at the same time, which gives us a wonderful opportunity to practice what I'm going to suggest to you. If you are finding yourself waking up 3 o'clock in the morning, unable to fall asleep because negative thoughts are assailing you, what you need to do is to displace the negative thought with a positive thought. Because if the positive thought occupies your mind, you are unable to dwell on the negative thought. It's as simple as that. But how do you actually conjure up, you, the human magician, another thought, another rabbit out of the hat? Well, you have to practice it. How do you practice thinking? One of the techniques that I share with people when I try to undo their negative thinking is I ask them to recollect 2 or 3 instances in their life where they have been supremely happy, ecstatic, even going back to childhood. And then when they've come up with one image, because everyone has such an image of happiness, we practice it. We practice it. I take them through meditatively in terms of reliving that moment, being able to once again look at all the aspects of that moment, the sounds of that moment, the sights of that moment, the textures of that moment, the inner dynamics of that moment. And then I do it again with them and again with them and again with them. And then I ask them to practice 3 times a day for no less than 3 minutes. And 3 minutes is a long time to keep an imaginative thought in mind. For a month. I have got such a success rate in terms of that. What are we doing there? We're creating a new pathway for transmitters to flow through the brain. And every time that a negative thought arises, when you switch to the positive thought, you are undoing the old one, creating it as a non-entity, and rehabituating yourself to a new state, a new mindset. Now, I've said that rather quickly and glibly, and of course, we aren't doing it this morning. But what's the point that I'm making? The point I'm making is that you can alter your emotional state of being through practice. It's not unlike playing a piano. Say someone amongst us would like to take up piano at our stage of our life. But we're not going to go the old-fashioned method. We're not going to sit down and practice scales in a boring fashion. You and I are thoroughly modern people. And how do thoroughly modern people handle the approach to music? Well, we're going to study academically. I'm going to study the lives of Beethoven, Mozart, Brahms, Bach, you name it. I'm going to study the notations. I'm going to look at the mathematical constructs between the notes. I'm going to be able to understand the whole nature of music and its nuances. 12 months I spend studying theory of music. At the end of 12 months, you and I say, we're ready. And what do? We sit behind a keyboard for the first time, put our fingers onto the keyboard and say, fingers, do your stuff. And guess what? The fingers don't do their stuff. And you say, why? If I know music, why don't the extremities of my body, my fingers, equally know the music? I'm one element, but it doesn't work. So what do I do next? I go back to the old-fashioned method and I practice scales. over and over again, seemingly boringly. And guess what? The fingers start to pick it up. Why? Because unless I practice the fingers, the neurotransmitter connection between brain and fingers has not been made. The connection's not there. Likewise, in terms of emotion and mind, fear and courage, unless I practice courage, my default, because of life, is going to be fear. And therefore, it requires us, in such circumstances that we find ourselves in today, to be able to practice in a way that is able to draw our inner strength from within us. And it does require it. One more little consideration. Mind and emotion. We would say that somewhere along the line, courage and fear are emotions. But what do I mean by an emotion? If I were to ask you right now for you to define for me what is an emotion, without unmuting yourself, in your own mind, answer the question, what is an emotion? Think about it for 10 seconds. Okay, 10 seconds are up. How many of you would have defined emotions somewhere in context of mind? Somewhere we don't make a clear distinction between mind and emotion. And I find that true of Western psychology also. Even within our various Western psychological teachings, the distinction between mind and emotion is not clear. And yet in our Jewish spiritual teachings, it's absolutely clear, because these two, mind and emotion, seichel and midos, are two separate consciousness flows. They're different. They are interrelated, admittedly, but they are two quite separate flows. And if we go into a training program, we need to train each separately. Mind is the way that the neshama flows through the brain. Emotion is the way that the same neshama flows through the heart, figuratively speaking. How do they relate? So in the celebrated work by the Alter Rebbe called Sefer Tanya, the Book of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe coins the following mastery teaching. Moach shalit al halev. Moach shalit al halev. Which means that the mind determines the outcomes of emotions. What does that mean? That means the mind is the compass that decides on the direction, and the emotions then flow according to that compass. What if we don't activate the compass? If you don't pull the compass out of the pocket? You're out on the wide sea yachting without a compass? Foolhardy. Therefore, we need a compass. Only the mind can determine direction. Emotions provide the fuel. I might think that I want to intend to give tzedakah. And I think about it, how lovely it is if I were to give tzedakah to JNF, to Spirit Grow, whatever might be the case. But thinking about it doesn't do it. I have to act on it. I can't act on it unless my emotional fuel reaches a point where I extend my hand, where I actually carry out the function. So whilst mind provides direction, emotion provides the fuel to activate it. And that's a very important relationship, mind and emotion. So people would say, yeah, I really want to strengthen myself, especially under these circumstances. I want to be able to relieve myself of a sense of loneliness. I want to stop fearing social isolation. Or better, more importantly, I want to think well of the future. And here we are, bombarded by media. And you should know that the media is not a beneficent educational institution. The media is a commercial activity to make money. And the media knows full well its psychology, which is, if we can make our viewers afraid, they'll be drawn to the screen. They'll stick to the screen. And therefore, fear mongering is one of the most basic approaches of media. Now, I'm not saying it's always intentional, but that is its nature. How many of the various commentators that you've watched on screen in the last week, what proportion of them would have subtly been bringing out messages of fear? If you don't do this, this will be what will happen. And look what's happened, the number of deaths. And look at the number of COVID cases. Very little context. Now, of course, it's horrific, the repercussions. But Baruch Hashem, Australia is doing well. Even Melbourne, which is not doing so well under Australian standards, in world standards, it's still very, very low. It's very likely that you and I tomorrow will be around to talk about it. Now, I'm not trying to provide us with a false sense of security. Of course, we have to be careful. But what I'm saying is the messaging out there makes us fearful of tomorrow. Are you confident about tomorrow? Do you have a sense of future? In other words, does your mind, as a compass bearing, provide you with positivity or negativity? Because that's the way the emotion will be. The emotion will either be one of fear or one of confidence. We have two Hebrew words for these. Emunah and bitachon. What does it mean, emunah and bitachon? You know your Hebrew to some extent, and emunah generally translates as faith, and bitachon usually translates as security. You know, you have a Sar HaBitachon, the defense secretary or the defense minister in Israel. But these are big words, faith, security. Let's break these down now. The Lubavitcher Rebbe defined them very pragmatically. He said as follows: Emunah is the belief that everything that has ever happened in your life is for your current good. Even if it were painful, even if it seemed as if it was going to hurt you. Everything that has ever happened in your life is for your current good. That's emunah. Bitachon is the belief that the challenge you face now, today, will have a positive outcome. Now, what's the difference between the two now? Emunah deals from past to present. In other words, whatever has ever happened to you in the past is for your current good. Somehow, believe it. Bitachon deals from the present to the future. The challenge you face now will have a positive outcome. Now, these two propositions, emunah and bitachon, are axiomatic. What do I mean by axiomatic? By axiomatic, I mean that they're not provable. They're the basis. There are many things in life that are not provable. We call them beliefs. Whilst they're not provable, they're not disprovable. We have a choice, bechira chofshit. We have free choice to choose the positive or the negative. I have free choice about predicting tomorrow to be a better day or a worse day. I'm asking you to adopt in your lives the principle of emunah and bitachon. And you'll ask me, why? It's 50-50. There's a statistical probability that tomorrow will be worse than today or better than today. How can you, Laibl, tell me to choose the positive? Well, I say to you, if it's 50-50, then why not? But that's not enough. So I'm going to give you a couple of reasons why you should. Number one, we know that positive thinking affects our health and wellness. The mind-body medicine model is clear today. If we think positively, through that positive thinking, the brain influences the cellular functions of the body. We know that positive thinking creates a higher degree of health and wellness, and negative thinking creates hurt and pain and illness. For example, we know statistics that angry people who are habitually angry live shorter lives and have more illnesses, as an example. So one of the rationales I'm giving you to choose the axiom of emunah and bitachon is you'll be healthier. Therefore, your immune functions will operate better. And therefore, your capacities to withstand the threat of COVID are much improved. First rationale. Second rationale, people like to be around positive people. They don't like to be around pessimists and negative people. Therefore, your relationships will improve. Friendships will ensue. And as I mentioned at the outset of the Harvard University study, this is a direct underpinning to your happiness. So I'm giving you two rationales why you should be positively disposed rather than negatively disposed. Axiomatic, admittedly, but I'm giving you now two secondary reasons why you should adopt emunah and bitachon in your life. And it's only a matter of bechira chofshit, free choice. This is what distinguishes us from the animal world, from the vegetational world, and the inanimate world. Every aspect of our existence possesses neshama, flow of soul. Different formats of the neshama. In a stone, the soul can't manifest itself because the body of the soul, the body of the stone is much more limited. But it's there. And a stone has to exist because of molecular forces, the van der Waals forces between the molecules, atomic structure, subatomic, the energy, matter and energy interchangeable, etc., etc. There has to be some flow of energy underneath the stone to keep it as a stone. We call that the stone, the soul of the stone. Likewise, vegetation. But vegetation has a more dexterous body, which allows the neshama to influence it to move, to grow, to incline towards the sun. Whereas with an animal, the body of an animal is even more sufficient to allow the soul to express in much clearer motion, movement, and rudimentary communication. But the human being is even more dexterous as a body to be able to express the neshama, to express the soul. So we have higher order aptitudes, like the capacity to understand ourselves in context of history, to have quests for the future, the use of our imagination. All these things provide us with even a higher aptitude, and the aptitude for choice, bechira chofshit. We can choose between the forces of our lower order self, security, fear, protect ourselves, fortress mentality, it's about me, or I can choose to be altruistic, share of myself, give of myself, contribute to others, contribute to the world. Every moment, My thoughts, my words, my behavior are one or the other. And you have to ask yourself, which one am I at this moment? And at this moment, I mean, at the moment of COVID insurgency. And we can exercise that choice freely. Choose the axiom, emunah bitachon. Choose thinking positive about tomorrow. Have the courage and draw on the inner strength, which is in that moment of choice. You make a commitment. I'm adopting a posture of emunah and bitachon no matter what. Yes, I'm going to have byproducts of better health and better relationships. But I know that this is better for me and for the world. And that's the basic thesis that I wanted to share with you this morning. Now, admittedly, I've raised a good number of descriptions, models, and issues, and packed quite a lot probably in the shortness of about just short of 45 minutes that we've been together. And I don't expect us to necessarily recall all this, but fortunately it's being recorded by Jackie, and therefore you have access to it. But I think I want to spend, if you don't mind, another 5-7 minutes trying to make this information operate within you, internalizing it. And the best way that I know to achieve that is through meditation. I want to take you through a 5-minute meditation, little exercise to internalize, and then we'll open up for discussion. Now, meditation is just a word. If you were to consult Professor Google as to what meditation is, you would find hundreds of different definitions and modalities. There's no such thing as the right way to meditate. The common denominator of all meditations is focusing. But what you focus on, how you focus, that depends on the goals and the intentions of the pathway that it stems from, whether it be a spiritual pathway, psychological pathway, or a medicinal pathway, whatever might be the case. So the Lubavitch Rebbe again mentioned that we have to be careful with some of the Eastern meditations, TM and others, because they have elements of avodah zarah, which hurt the Jewish soul. But the process of meditation itself can be remedial. And certainly if you follow, for example, in the 80s, Dr. Herbert Benson, who began to experiment with the use of breath as a technique in terms of therapy, not in terms of spirituality, but in terms of therapy, he showed by having your body connected to electrodes that when you focus on breath in a meditative fashion, the result is physiological changes. Changes including different brain waves emanating from alpha, beta to theta, different skin resistance even, certainly different heart rates and pulse rates and other changes. But this all becomes known as the relaxation response. So if you wanted to create self-change, the first step is move away from the past, create momentary plateau and a level playing field. And that way you can more freely adopt something new. I'm going to take you through Benson's breath exercise. The Hebrew word for breath, neshima. The Hebrew word for soul, neshama. Obviously the same shoresh, the same source, the same root. Because in our spiritual teachings, breathing reveals the flow of the soul within. You want to know what a person's at that moment? Observe their breath. In Parashat Shemot, when Moses comes out of the desert and comes to his brothers and sisters, an old man walks out of the wilderness and says, brothers, sisters, we're going to go to the promised land. Do you remember how they responded? They said, go away, old man. Stop annoying us. We have a whole quota of work to do. Our taskmasters are going to beat us. We have no time for this stupidity. And Rashi comments there, why did they respond like that? Mikotzer ruach, because of shortness of breath. In other words, short Shallow breathing reveals stress. Deep abdominal breathing is relaxation. So I'm going to take you into a relaxation mode for 5-6 minutes. So, posture, just where you're seated. Put your feet symmetrically on the ground, hands resting on knees and thighs. Back fairly straight without being too rigid. Head well balanced on your shoulders. And gently close your eyes. And just focus on your breath. Just breathing quite normally, in and out. And prefer to breathe in through your nose. Breathing in and breathing out through your nose. And as you do, become aware of the difference in temperature of the air entering the nasal passages compared to the temperature of the air leaving the nose. Slightly cooler air entering and warmer air exiting. Slow down and deepen your in and out breath, and that temperature difference will become more apparent. Cool air entering, warm air exiting. Sense that temperature differential. And with your next in-breaths, direct the breath down to your abdomen, past your chest. The way to achieve that is when you breathe in, expand your abdomen at the same time to collect the air. And to breathe out, contract your abdomen, pull your tummy back in to expel the air. So take a deep, slow breath in, expand your abdomen, collect the air there, and now pull it in and expel the air. This is a little counterintuitive, so you need to practice it. Breathing through your nose, deep, expanding your abdomen, and contracting it. So just practice that for 2 or 3 breaths. Expanding your abdomen as you breathe in. And now let's lend some rhythm to the breathing. We'll breathe in for a count of 3, hold for a count of 3, and breathe out for a count of 4. So take a slow, deep breath in, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, out, 2, 3, 4. Abdominally. In, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, out, 2, 3, 4. And just continue breathing deeply, abdominally, gracefully, smoothly, a perfect circle. And just be aware at the back of your mind how relaxed you have become in the space of a few short minutes. Something you can achieve whenever you choose to. God also breathes. God's breath animates the universe, resulting in day, night, The tide comes in, the tide goes out. The petals open, the petals close. In and out. The breath of life. And just spend a few more moments enjoying the inner tranquility, the inner balance that allows you to move forward, making wise choices for the future, for tomorrow, choosing confidence, belief, strength. Tomorrow and all the tomorrows will always be better. Focus again on your nose, breathing in slowly and out. Cooler air, warmer air. Begin moving your fingers and your toes now in the room where you're seated. Move your fingers, move your toes. And when you feel ready, gently open your eyes, coming all the way back to our wonderful JNF Zoom session. Okay, so we've done a lot, probably in a very short space of time. By the way, I produce daily meditations for anyone who wants. I've put my my email address on the chat screen. If you look at chat, if you want to receive a daily meditation, it comes through WhatsApp. Just send me your telephone, your cell phone, your mobile phone number, and I'll put you on the list. And it's a short 2-minute meditation every morning. Anyway, Jackie, thank you very much. I've expired at the moment. Now let's talk.
Wow. This is beyond. Thank you so much. Before I invite Bella for the vote of thanks, I just, that was absolutely phenomenal. I haven't taken such copious notes since law school. I've probably go back and won't remember one thing. You lost me at good morning, but no, I'm joking. That was absolutely, that was incredible. And thank you so much for your time. That was, Ilana, just like the rest of the day off so I can meditate some more. I hope you all...
Hello, I just want to say
1 second.
hello, Bella.
We're just going to... 1 second. We just, if there are questions, please put up your hand. And Ariella, are you there? Ariella will unmute. Ariella's back. Anybody who has a question? Bella? 1 sec. Ariella, Bella. We can't hear you yet, Bella. We're going to unmute you.
Bella, please unmute yourself.
Yeah. Not Bella, Alex, the other Bella.
Right.
Not you, Bella, the other Bella.
Ah,
There we go.
There we go.
It's okay?
Yes.
Which Bella?
You.
Me? Hi, Laibl.
Hello.
I'm Janice's mother, Janice Hushon. So I want to give her regards and enjoyed you talk very, very, very much. Thank you.
Glad I have one person who enjoyed it.
Bye, thanks.
Thank you.
Any questions? You just put up your hand and I can't see everybody. Ariella, can you see if anyone else would like to ask a question?
Lynn?
Yeah, Rashalea wants to have one.
Not a question. I just wanted to tell you, my daughter Geraldine and I used to come to your house every Monday night for your amazing Kabbalah Shirim. And Jackie's my daughter as well. And it's just your
How
talk.
lovely.
Absolutely magnificent.
I appreciate your words. Very kind of you. Thank you.
It gives one a lot of thought, a lot of things to think about, and thank you very much indeed. Keith
Pleasure.
Bevel.
Yes, Keith.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
I think I've probably submitted everyone into submission of what I said. But there's so much there that it's very hard to be able to actually even raise questions because you don't know where to start. And I fully understand that and I empathize with that. One of the reasons I started Spirit Grow is because I felt very strongly that whereas in the world, Jewish people were questing for a more spiritual, with a small s, approach to life, which probably is a synonymous with meaningfulness. And I found that there wasn't a Jewish dimension that was able to be provided for that. Jews were turning to Buddhism if they were particularly oriented in that way and elsewhere. And I sort of feel that there is a need to provide for ourselves an approach that draws from our sources, that speaks to the moments that we're living in a very meaningful time. And I know that right now we're concerned not just about ourselves, we're concerned about our country, Israel, of course, thinking of the welfare of our resident country, Australia. And I want to just conclude with one thought, if I might, Jackie.
Of course.
The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, in a famous work known as Likutei Diburim, says the following statement on the opening page. He says, you can project a thought to someone across the other side of the world, and with your thought, affect them spiritually and materially. In other words, we don't stop at the surface of our skin. We radiate our consciousness across all space, even across time, but that's another discussion. So when we think well of our own brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael, and we think of the difficulties that they're facing, that we here in Australia are in no way even able to sense the kind of lives that they've been raised in, of the kind of threat around them and the natural habitual fear that very often lies there. This is a good time for us to send our thoughts to all our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael, and through our thought, affect the country materially and spiritually, and that'll bounce back to ourselves as well.
Amen.
Okay.
One more time for one more question, perhaps?
Can I?
Dieter?
No.
Dieter is under Edith Gould.
Bernie.
It's Julie.
Hi.
I popped in and I couldn't help but be blown away by your words and the studies that I have done. It's just gave me a big smile on my face. But when we were meditating, I was totally calm, and yet tears were coming down from my eyes. Now, what's going on there?
I probably can't answer you. I don't know you well enough to be able even to proffer an answer, so I won't pretend. But it is true that when we create for ourselves a neutral zone, then those things which are our deeper emotions can often well up. And one of the things that wells up may not be explicable. There may be aspects of memory deeply hidden underneath, but we should accept whatever happens. Now, I don't believe that your tears were necessarily tears of hurt and pain. They were probably tears from an unknown source that somehow in that moment of absolute relaxation were given the freedom to express where normally that freedom doesn't exist. So you probably are the best ultimate interpreter of that. But at the same time, I wouldn't be confused by that. I just let it be. There are nice phenomena that arise where we allow ourselves the inner pacification.
Excellent. Ariella, have we time for one more question? Okay, can you see anyone else?
Dita, did you want to ask a question? You need to unmute yourself, Dita.
Oh, hang on. Wait, I'm on mute. Can you hear me?
Right.
Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
I'd like you to answer me further, if possible, at another time, about your explanation about Judaism to the Dalai Lama. I have also had a meeting with him, and he's very inspirational.
Yes, Edith, he's a very, very good man. I was very impressed with him.
Yes.
And he does present to the world a wonderful message of other-centeredness and compassion. The only point of disagreement that I had with him was when I asked him, would he perhaps tell his Jewish followers to investigate their Jewish roots? Now, I know that there's apocryphal stories going around that the Dalai Lama sends Jews back to their Judaism. I can tell you that he didn't. No. He said that Buddhism is for everybody, including Jewish people. And I understand where he's coming from. But at the same time, I certainly hold very strongly that when you have a Jewish soul, your life's expression has to be Jewish. There are, Edith, 71 different soul types in existence. Jewish is one of them. I'm quoting the Kabbalah at this moment. And each of the others have their own chosen path of expression. And each grouping of souls has to present itself honestly and openly. It's like a symphony orchestra. If you don't have everyone playing their own correct notes, the overall beauty doesn't exist. So when Jewish people don't express their Jewish music in the symphony of creation, everyone suffers. We all need to express our true selves.
Thank you.
Excellent. All right, I would love to just call upon...
And it's Lisa T. I just want to say one nice thing too. Is that okay?
Yeah, last question.
Hi, I just want to say it was really important that the Rabbi mentioned about the media, because that calmed my nerves a bit, because the media is really good at getting to people's minds and souls, because it makes you watch more and fear more. So I thought that was a really good point to bring out. And thank you for advising me that it's got to do with psychology as well as what's happening, but also psychology. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa. I would now like to call upon the chair of our JNForever group, Bella Ehrlich, to do a vote of thanks. And Bella, you'll just need to unmute yourself. Bella Ehrlich. There we go.
Oh, Rabbi, that was just amazing, absolutely inspirational. Your ability to combine secular and spiritual and just so much knowledge from every corner of the world and life was just amazing and mind-blowing. And you're right, we're living in a terrible period of COVID. We're sitting at home, which makes those lower order skills seem a lot less important. Does it matter if I have one pair of shoes or 100 pairs of shoes? Not really, because I wear my slippers every day. So those lower order skills seem to have taken on a very low order value at the moment. It's the higher order skills of what we can do for other people, how other people are coping, and what's happening in the world per se. And you've really awakened our consciousness to that and given us perhaps a framework to think about it and evaluate where we are as people and where our friends are, where our family is, where the world is, in fact, because we hear terrible things every day and we still have to make sense of it, even in this COVID environment. And with all of that in mind, and you talked about Israel, and our thoughts are always with Israel, and that's why we're here with the JNForever. And I'd just like to encourage people, if you haven't already, get online and click onto the gala dinner, which is free, an amazing, amazing sense of talent. And let's get together and show solidarity for Israel, for Jewish people, and what we believe in. There we go, it's just come up on screen. Thanks, Ariella. You talked about our compass says, yes, I will do something. So yes, you've got it in mind to do it, but use your emotion to click on and actually log on to it and say, yes, I am coming to join you for this spectacular event. So thank you so much. And it's refreshing to think that all the things that have happened in our past, be they good or bad, have helped our current situation. And the challenges we face today will have positive outcomes tomorrow. So thank you for giving us hope, courage, and perhaps the willingness to try harder. Thank you so much. That was the best talk I've heard in many years.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Bella.
you.
And we've got an incredible speaker for next week, but it's a very hard act to follow. It's going to be very, very hard act to follow that. Thank you very, very much, Rabbi. I'm sure everybody agrees. And with Bella, it was incredible. Much to think about. Thank you, Ariella, for everything. And we will see you all next week. The invitations for next week's event will go out either today or tomorrow. And we look forward to seeing you all soon. We will also have this recorded, if that's okay with Rabbi Wolf. And we will also, in addition to that, send the email address of Rabbi Wolf in case you want to join into the daily meditation. I know I certainly will be doing that. And have a wonderful day, everybody. Enjoy the sunshine, because it will be raining after that. And have a lovely week. Stay safe and warm, and we will see you next week.